presenter tonight is Carole deForest. She doesn't really need an introduction. She does the program a year. She's a good member. Her topic is sharing local COVID stories, which I think everyone remembers COVID.
And I'm not really the presenter because I have 4 other people who are the presenters. But brief introduction. This is going to be about the COVID pandemic, which was such a great disruptor, not only worldwide, but right here with us. But it's come and it's pretty much gone. And now, because we're a historical society, we are kind of oh, I'm sorry. Can you not? I'll hunker down right next to it. Anyway, when you're a historical society, it's your duty when something big happens on your watch that you make sure it gets reported and remembered. So that's why we're doing this kind of a program. The pandemic hit us with a kind of unexpected force, and it took the better part of 2 years before we began to be over it. When we were over it, it was like in a very ragged fashion. It didn't happen overnight. Some of us were very anxious to get back to normal. Some of us were a little bit afraid to be out and about. And some of us were angry, and we weren't even sure what we were angry about or who to be angry with. It just left us, all of us were in sort of a peculiar situation. Some people wrote it out with minimal drama, and yet for other people, there were deep, serious loss involved in all of that. But we have a handful of stories. We put them together. They will go in the archives, and they will be available for people to look at in years to come. Now, the 12 stories will be read by 4 individuals. Those people tonight are Pat Dwyer, Bart McDougall, Heather McDougall, and Howard, and they'll read them in succession. So I would ask you, after each story, save your appreciation till the end, because we want the flow of the stories to go from one story to the next. One other footnote, it will sometimes seem like things are being over-identified. For example, instead of just saying in Hannaford's, it'll say the Hannaford's grocery store at Esperance. That's because this information is for the archives and for future readers. So bear with it. Enjoy the stories. Enjoy the evening. And thank you. Pat Dwyer, first reader. Thank you.
This story was submitted by Bella Stewart. It was in the spring, probably toward the end of March, a Sunday afternoon. Bella's son Lance was spending the weekend, as he usually did, at home with her in Duanesburg. During the week, Lance, who is a learning-impaired young man, lived in Niskayuna at one of the group homes associated with the ARC Maple Ridge facility. The television was turned on in the house, and Bella happened to hear, in a string of COVID-related announcements, that the Maple Ridge Day Center was closing the following day. She was able to confirm what she suspected, that plans were shaping up to place the several group homes into lockdown as well. And she realized that if Lance returned that night, he would be separated from his family for an indefinite future. She made the quick decision to keep him home with her, and with the help of another son, they rode out the pandemic together on home ground, where they could safely move about with few people, in an abundance of good fresh country air. It was 4 months or more before they began to gradually return to less restricted living. During that period, Bella developed a close telephone bond with another mother whose special needs child required 24-hour care. In that difficult time, they were a source of strength and comfort to each other. This story was submitted by Bella Stewart. The second story I have is the story was submitted by Charlotte Fricky. Charlotte Fricky currently lives in Alcades and attends the senior meal site at Our Lady of Fatima Church in Delancey. In the fall of 2020, she was living with her daughter's family in Fairmont, West Virginia. At Thanksgiving time, the daughter and her husband were vacationing in Florida with their camping trailer And as Charlotte was home alone, her grandson's family, out of the goodness of their heart, brought her a turkey dinner. What none of them knew at the moment was that he already had the COVID infection. That put Charlotte in a 10-day quarantine period during which she basically stayed up in her bedroom, as the rest of the house had been exposed to the virus. And at this point, it wasn't largely understood what would be best to do. During this time, her daughter returned from the south, and it was determined that they should not enter the house. They continued to live in their camper parked in the yard for about 3 days, communicating by their cell phones until it just got too cold to stay there any longer. They came in and began a disinfecting campaign of the whole house, hoping for the best. Gratefully, none of them caught the infection. When vaccinations were available, Charlotte made an appointment and had to travel 45 minutes to a clinic that had been set up in an old mall. There, she followed a long, slow-moving line of masked, registered people, each with the necessary paperwork and carefully spaced 6 feet apart. All were asked to sit and wait after the shot for about 10 minutes for observation before being excused. And this story was submitted by Charlotte Fricky.
This story was submitted by Debbie Gallup. It was the middle of March 2020. The head of the Senior Meal Center at the Bishop Scully Hall in Delanson, I think we know where that is, came in at the end of the day and told us that we were going to be closed for a while because the virus was spreading. Probably 3 weeks, she said. We were in shock. I was walking out with everyone and saying goodbye. Nancy mentioned that she needed to go shopping. I said, I hope you don't need toilet paper. She looked at me confused and asked why I said that. I told her my husband went to BJ's the day before and it was packed. Among other things, people were loading up their carts with toilet paper. This was unsettling. What will we do? She said. She did not need any additional problems. Her husband was in a wheelchair. She already had a lot on her mind. Doug, my husband, and I luckily had enough to last us for a while. But I needed a few other things, so the next day I went to the Hannaford grocery store out near Esperance. It was packed, and there was a line like I'd never seen before all the way to the opposite side of the store. Very unnerving. I was told as I walked in that they had just received a shipment including toilet paper. And every customer was allowed 1 package. I rushed to the other side of the store and got my 1 package, picked up a few other things and stood in line, very scared about what was going on, not knowing exactly what was going to happen next. When I left, I drove to my friend's house to give them the toilet paper. They were not home, so I left it on a bench on their porch. I called them later that day to make sure they had found it. They said that they had been out most of the day looking to buy some, but had been unsuccessful. When they got home, they saw the package on their porch and said that there must have been a visit from the TP Angel. And that's what they called me for a while. In the meantime, my mother-in-law, Evelyn Gallup, was spending time in Florida, visiting her sister Gladys. She wanted to come home, but we all told her that she was better off staying put and not flying right now. Then she called and said that they were out of toilet paper down there. And would I please go to her house next door and mail to them whatever I could find. We packed up what she had and I mailed it to Florida. In the meantime, at the Delanson Senior Meals Center, my coworker and I still had work to do. Whilst most of the other co-workers in Schenectady were being paid to stay home, we had Meals on Wheels to be prepared and delivered. We were very careful and delivered with masks and gloves. When it was going past 3 weeks of confinement, we started to also make lunches on our for our regular participants. They drove by the hall, stayed in their car. Wearing my mask and gloves, I handed the donation box through the car window. They handed it back, and I handed them their meals. A couple of seniors had voiced concern about not being able to get to the store for food. I said that I would shop for them. Wow, which was better than us riding together in my car. Good woman. Once a week, I drove to each of their houses, picked up their lists and credit cards, went to Hannaford, wearing a mask and gloves, shopped for all three of us, delivered to each of them, then came home and washed all of my groceries before putting it away. I was always very afraid of getting the virus, so much so that I did not even visit my 2 children and 6 grandchildren. As time went by, the virus was still spreading, and it was even worse down south. After Evelyn begged us to get her a ticket home, we decided that despite the air travel, she probably would be safer here at home with us. We wanted to give her a nice welcome home since she had been gone for so long, but we could not be all together. We decided to have all of her close friends and family park their cars along her long driveway, and when she came through, we all honked and waved. Another thing that people started doing to stay socially distant was drive-by birthday greetings. The birthday child would sit in the front yard, and friends and family would all meet up at a nearby parking lot, probably like a staging area, to decorate their cars with streamers, etc. Then we'd have a parade past the house, blowing horns, waving, and shouting happy birthday. It was about to be my grandson Jackson's 6th birthday. He said that he would like to see police cars. Really? Well, we talked to a friend who actually made that happen. The local police had about 5 squad cars drive by with flashing lights and wailing sirens. It was a pretty special birthday for a 6-year-old. One day there was a knock at my door, and I was wary because I didn't want anyone in my house. So I cautiously opened the door to see 2 masked people standing there, one holding an Amazon delivery package. I told them they could leave the package right there on the bench outside the door. The one holding the package looked at me with surprise and said, "Mom, I can't believe you don't recognize your own son." He was trying to hand me the package he had just found sitting on the bench outside the door. We all had a good laugh, and even now, years later, he still won't let me live that one down. When weeks turned into months, and months into a year, I really needed to find ways to spend time with kids and grandkids. We did luckily have phones and computers that allowed us to see each other during phone conversations, but it wasn't the same. Sometimes I would visit them outside with my mask on. I really wanted to hug them all, so my husband ordered for me a white hazmat coverall. I bundled up with gloves and a mask and went to my son's house, invited the kids outside and gave them all a big hug. Then we proceeded to play ball and kind of horse around. My son said that I looked like a big white Teletubby. Well, whatever. We had fun. Most of my fear was because I worked with my co-worker who had asthma and was also caring for Evelyn, taking her to doctor's appointments and so on. Evelyn was 85, and I didn't want her to either of them to get the virus. Unfortunately, it took me a long time to be comfortable enough to breathe around other people, let alone in public places. And to this day, I carry that deep fear of contracting the virus. Debbie Gallup.
This story was submitted by Andy and Gloria Tinning. When we first heard the news reports, it was referred to as the coronavirus, which is a large grouping of related and dangerous respiratory infections. But very shortly, the name given to this particular strain was COVID-19, 19 being the year which it had its earliest beginnings. It soon became a worldwide pandemic, resulting in many deaths. In 2025, as I write this, we still do not have a definite answer as to whether its origin in China was from a laboratory or an open-air meat market specializing in wild jungle game. As it began to spread here in upstate New York and hospitalizations increased, public health officials became alarmed. We were all under stay-at-home restrictions and discouraged from contact with other people. The word lockdown became familiar. Living in the country, we had more space and options for being outside our houses. For exercise, my wife Gloria and I walked back and forth along our long downhill then uphill driveway, happily distant from everybody. Our church, like most others, was closed, as were most restaurants, offices, barbershops, and the like. We were planning to celebrate our 4th anniversary in April, but there was no place to go for any kind of celebration. My knee replacement surgery had also been scheduled for April, but Ellis Hospital, with its necessary emphasis on treating infectious patients, had to cancel what came to be called elective surgeries. Because my condition was worsening, my doctor was able to get me scheduled for a later time at the hospital in Saratoga. Throughout the community, public gatherings were canceled, or, if held outside, curtailed in various ways. We're car racing fans. We found that while races continued to be held through the warm months, many tracks were closed to spectators. When we did go to the Fonda Speedway, we had to wear masks and also give our names and phone numbers so that we could be contacted in the event of an outbreak. As 2020 turned to 2021, vaccines were being ready for distribution. We tried to locate a pharmacy where we could get the vaccine. This was all very difficult and confusing for everybody. Finally, Gloria found out on the internet that a temporary vaccination site was being set up on the campus of the State University at Albany. A very large white tent was erected near Fuller Road. There was a specific protocol for making an appointment. We went through the process and got our first shot, which was on March 2nd, 2021, followed by a second dose 20 days later. Come fall, we celebrated Thanksgiving, and the next day I woke up very weak and ill. Trying to call our doctor, we found the office was closed for the holiday weekend, and it was recommended that I go to Albany Med Urgent Care Facility on Altamont Avenue in Schenectady. The doctor there told me I needed to go directly to the emergency room at Ellis Hospital. There I sat in a large waiting room, so overcrowded that I was told I should try going somewhere else. But I was feeling too weak and exhausted even to get up from my chair. I waited for 20 hours and later learned that other hospitals were even worse for waiting. At last I was seen by a doctor and admitted with a COVID infection. Since I have sleep apnea and did not have my CPAP device with me, I had to wear an oxygen collar for the 4 days that I lay in the hospital bed. I was very anxious to go home to Gloria, who was confined there, as she also had been diagnosed with COVID, and additionally a kidney infection. The day after I arrived home, I brought her to Ellis Hospital, where as an outpatient she received an infusion for the COVID and a prescription for the infection. This process took the whole day and was exhausting. When we finally got home, our phone answering machine was blinking. It was a message from our church that they were praying for us and to please call if we needed help. This concludes our adventures with the COVID virus, Andy and Gloria Tinning. I have another story. This story was submitted by Wilma Gage Lee. In 2020, I was lucky that my hip replacement surgery had already been scheduled before St. Peter's Hospital closed their doors to all elective procedures. After the surgery, I required physical therapy, but because the coronavirus was spreading, The physical therapy buildings were now closed, and so a therapist came to my house to help me. We both wore masks, so as not to expose me or my husband David, who was then very ill, to possible contagion. It was either our older daughter, who was now working from home, or my retired niece, who did all of our grocery shopping. My husband was suffering from stage 4 kidney disease, a very rare type, and his doctor had told us that his kidneys were petrified. For us, it was very difficult to feel so isolated from friends and family when we were so badly needing their help. The holidays and the various birthday celebrations were all canceled that year, but our daughter and her twin sons took a chance and came anyway, along the thruway from Rochester, to see how the ailing folks were doing. Though it was the holiday season and usually heavily traveled, there was very little traffic on the thruway. Businesses everywhere were closed. The supply chain of many goods was disrupted, causing people to hoard. Germ gel and disinfectant wipes were everywhere in public places, and we were advised to wash our hands thoroughly and often. On September 22, 2020, my husband could no longer be cared for at home and was admitted to Ellis Hospital. Visiting hours were very limited. He died there 2 days later, one day after his 81st birthday. None of his family could be there with him to offer even the comfort of holding his hand. This has always been disturbing to me and our daughters. David did not die of COVID, but the infection precautions made necessary by the pandemic made his passing from us much more difficult and lonely. His funeral service, which was at White's Funeral Home in Delanson, was well attended, but we were told by many who were in their elder years and therefore more vulnerable that they were not going to attend and take the risk of being in the presence of so many people. That's we'll believe.
This story was submitted by John Peters. February 2020. Debbie, my wife, and I returned from a Florida vacation via the airways. A few days later, we were sick. Flu-like symptoms, excessive tiredness, weak and achy. It was very early in the time frame of the disease. Local alarm was not yet spreading, but we have often speculated, even without a diagnosis, that we had contracted COVID. As the year developed, more restrictions, sickness, and death occurred. Watching the healthcare system become overwhelmed with this emergency and no vaccine yet available. We, along with the whole country, were very concerned about staying healthy. It was disconcerting when in a press conference the president suggested that consuming a disinfectant like bleach might prove effective. This was not recommended by the infectious disease specialists. Fortunately, our living situation was a semi-rural hamlet of Quaker Street in Schenectady County. This isolation afforded us the freedom of roaming our quarter-acre of lawn and gardens. This was a far cry from those who lived in the cities and were trapped in their homes or small apartments. It was strange and even a little frightening when driving to find very few vehicles on the road. Where was everybody? It seemed like a sci-fi movie when the earth was coming to an end. In public, masks were worn and distance from individuals was mandated. Special rules were established by businesses, especially grocery stores, which designated certain hours for seniors and other vulnerable citizens to shop apart from the general public. Then the vaccines arrived, and shortly after that, a new administration at the national level, and there was forward movement in treating the pandemic. There probably isn't a person on this earth that was not influenced by the death of a friend or a family member. When over 1 million Americans died from COVID, the grief and anguish was devastating, and in some cases, the sorrow lingers. The story was submitted by John Peters.
This story was submitted by Carole deForest. In the summer of 2019, my husband of 58 years passed from this life, and I found myself alone. Personal adjustments included a new awareness of solitude. but I was still able to carry on with my life somewhat as it had been. Within 6 months, however, all of that changed, not just for me, but for everybody. A new restrictive solitude governed where we went and what we did. The routines of daily life took on a new shape. The computer became the center of our life as we went to church on Zoom, found entertainment on YouTube, shopped online, kept in touch with doctors through telehealth screens, and with friends and family through Facebook. But even before things went from bad to worse here in our community, even before the lockdowns began, we still didn't quite grasp what was going on. The tragedy of this unfolding pandemic showed up quite near to my own doorstep. In my case, it was the guest minister at my church, one late January day, a week or so before everything closed down. He had been my husband's friend, and that Sunday at the church door, we made plans for him to come to a visit later in the week. The visit never happened. That evening, he and his wife went out to dinner with another couple. Within a day, all four were sick with symptoms of COVID. For the men, both in their early 70s, conditions rapidly worsened. Unconscious and by ambulance, each had to be taken to the hospital, where for a few days life hung in the balance. Neither recovered. Neither saw their loved ones again. For the wives, the infection was less severe, and in a reasonable time, both women returned to health. But because of the new and necessary hospital rule for absolutely no visitors, they had to suffer this extreme loss, sick and alone. There was no opportunity for the normal words of love or comfort, no moment of goodbye. This painful, disorienting experience left each of them with a long, difficult journey of making their peace with a wrenching, unexpected loss, within a context of isolation from all those who would ordinarily have been there to offer comfort and support. The pandemic, for these friends of mine, as for many others, is remembered now as a tragic, lonely, long-lasting grief that cut painfully into the heart. That's Carole deForest.
This story was submitted by Pat Van Buren. When I first heard the word pandemic in January of 2020, the news of the coronavirus felt scary and urgent. We were in Florida at the time, and we were able to isolate ourselves very well, but grocery shopping became a challenge. Because of panic buying, water, cleaning supplies, paper products, and food products that were shelf-stable were sometimes in short supply. By the last of March, our daughter Katie arrived at our door and announced emphatically that we were not to go to the market anymore. She would do our shopping. It was at that moment that I realized we had better get on the road and head home to Quaker Street. There were preparations to be made. I knew that once we left Florida, we would not be allowed back in. There were border checks between Florida and Georgia so that only workers could pass through, or full-time Florida-Georgia residents. I had also heard that the rest areas along the interstates would be closed. But since deliveries were essential nationwide, the truckers' union demanded they be kept open, and thankfully they were. Motels were reluctant to have guests. When making reservations, they asked, "What is the purpose of your visit?" The correct answer was, "I'm traveling back to my home in New York." That opened the door. As we were packing up, I started making masks for ourselves using work handkerchiefs and elastic hairbands. I also packed Lysol disinfecting wipes to use in the motel rooms. We left Florida on April 6th. The traffic was light and remained eerily light all the way home. Each state that we entered along our way displayed electronic signs with a "stay home" message. 2 days later, we were grateful to be safely home ourselves and planning to stay there. During the late spring, we had our first family gathering, a picnic lunch beside Mirror Lake. All get-togethers that summer were guided by good weather so that we could be outside, but at least together. In the fall of 2020, many people had made the decision not to return to Florida. However, we felt very safe returning to an environment where so much of our day would be spent outside. It was there that we received our first COVID vaccine in a large park near Fort Lauderdale, where we inched along for 2 hours as paperwork was handled along the drive, and then when we arrived at the final station, with windows rolled down and sleeves rolled up, we received our vaccine. I clearly remember feeling relief and gratitude. At some point during the pandemic, we received a stimulus check meant to be spent at local businesses, and indeed we did just that. We spent the check outside of Lake Placid buying Adirondack chairs for our back deck, our place of entertaining during those pandemic times. I remember stopping at our local Hannaford grocery store, masked, following the directional arrows, staying 6 feet apart, and how few people would make eye contact. How sad and isolating it was. Shopping became a dangerous chore, and certainly not the friendly social event it has thankfully become once again today.
This story was submitted by Carole. On March 11, 2020, we had our recreational vehicle parked at Jetty Park, Port Canaveral in Florida. I got a phone call from the office announcing that we had until noon on Thursday, March 13, that's 2 days, to get out. I was sitting on the beach with my daughter-in-law and granddaughter who had just arrived to spend 2 weeks with us. Well, I got this call. Of course, in my usual bad manner, I told the office we could not possibly be out by noon on the 13th, and they said, no problem. I did have a choice. The situation was explained. The park was closing. The gates would be padlocked at noon on that day. And either we would be out or the RV would be towed outside the gate at our expense. Well, when put that way, the choice was clear. My daughter-in-law and granddaughter went back to the RV and packed up as quickly as they could and left to drive back to North Carolina. We too began packing up, and on the morning of the 13th started up the RV, but the dreaded engine light, check engine light was on. Oh no, what do we do now? I went back to the office to say we were having a problem, and no surprise, I was told again, be out by noon. There was no way this was going to end differently. Well, of course, we left and drove cautiously to a shop where they looked at the RV and said, it was nothing serious. Okay then, we're on our way. We drove north on Highway I-95 to Jacksonville and found an RV park where we intended to continue our Florida vacation. It sure was strange to check in somewhere with no human contact. We were directed to leave our paperwork and payment outside on the porch. We did, and then found our site and set up. There were other people in the park, but no one was wandering around or stopping to talk. We did our grocery shopping at 6 in the morning. I would stay in the car and my husband would go in and get what we needed. Our son kept telling us to stay in Florida and not come back to New York because it was worse up here. We were unable to find any masks at the stores, so we made do with a couple I fashioned out of some old handkerchiefs. All cars were being stopped at the border between Florida and Georgia. One day we went out for a ride, and since our park was near the border, I took with us all of our receipts from Jetty Park and the park we were currently staying at in Jacksonville, so that in case we were stopped, we had proof that we'd been in Florida since December. My husband said it seemed crazy to bring such paperwork along, but another person in the park confirmed it was what you now had to do. One day, sitting outside our RV, we watched the young woman on the site across from us who was having groceries delivered. She unpacked all the bags outside on the picnic table and wiped each item down with a Clorox wipe. This was becoming common practice, with no one sure if it was necessary or not. But this woman also had a brand new baby to think about. We stayed near Jacksonville for about a month, and were getting anxious to be home. We could see I-95 from our park and were aware that there was hardly any traffic in either direction. We decided it was time to get on the road. Along the way, we pulled into one of those very large pilot gas stations, usually bustling with motorists, and there was no other car at the pumps, no other people in the store. Our unusual adventure came to an end with our safe arrival back home in Mariahville in late April of 2020. We were travel weary, but in good health, and that Florida vacation trip was like no other. Carole Plume.
This story was submitted by Sherry Schrady. In the summer of 2018, we were as clueless as anyone else about the emerging pandemic, but oddly, the complicating features of our COVID story were already being put in place. We had faced the fact that as empty nesters, our home of 40 years in Eden Corners was much larger than we needed. It was time to sell. We spent a year downsizing and freshening up problem areas and then listed the house in September of 2019, hoping for a family to come and love it as much as we had. As 2020 stepped off into its winter months, we had a serious offer which we accepted. As this was happening, disturbing news about events in China and elsewhere around the world were reaching everybody's ears. March of 2020 was a time of general turmoil and uncertainty for everybody, and we had additional questions. How was this all going to work? Would we actually be able to make this move happen? At first, everything just stopped. All kinds of businesses were slowing down. With people working from home and meetings curtailed, I assumed that mortgage arrangements and closings would now require additional time. But in our case, the application paperwork sped through, and the buyer even waived the inspections. Everyone was wary of being in proximity with other people. We did not attend the closing. We signed the necessary documents at home, and the closing itself took place in the parking lot outside the lawyer's office. We have a second home near Pasico in the southern Adirondacks, and in early May, this became our living quarters and base of operation for step number 2, which was the construction of our new home in Duanesburg. This project presented its own challenges. There was the mileage between Pasico and here, and also the COVID safe distance to maintain while working with others, applying for building permits at the Duanesburg Town Hall, planning with our contractor, John Mikas, and making the many necessary purchases. There were many trips to Home Depot, Lowe's, and local building suppliers, where we were in some cases coming up against surprising delays in securing materials and unpredictable escalating costs. Everyone everywhere was wearing masks. It made me realize that my hearing was not what it should be and that I had been relying on lip reading to understand what people were saying. John began to work on the house in August, and it was closed in by October. In January, Darrell and Ivan Easton appeared on the scene to begin the inside finishing work in winter weather in an unheated house. We were regularly in Duanesburg to oversee progress, and in February, we painted the interior rooms. Amazingly, it all came together, and we were able to move into our new home in early May of 2021, just a year after we left Eden Corners. Because we are retired educators and interested in how and what schools were doing to meet the situation, I include the following notes. Schools closed March 13, 2020, with no restart date announced. They reopened in September, and parents could opt for either in-school or online instruction. Snow days that year were non-existent as instruction continued online despite the weather. Children who were sick could listen online to their classes' lessons. A few weeks after the schools closed, parents were assigned times to retrieve their children's personal belongings. They were met outside the school building by masked school personnel who had collected the students' things in labeled plastic bags. The superintendent scrambled to get internet access for students, at times sending buses to remote areas without internet access to establish hotspots. Students whose parents gave consent were randomly screened for the virus. The school nurse and her aide were busy that year determining who was sick and whether or not the whole class should be sent home if one student tested positive. Many parents decided to transport their children themselves rather than send them on the bus. Those who did ride the bus were required to remain 6 feet apart, and there were separate bus runs for elementary and high school students. It was a complicated time of working things out without being sure just how serious this was and what was best for everybody. Our family basically weathered the ups and downs with fewer trials than some, but I well remember the complications and will always remember the sadness of a particular moment on Easter Sunday when our youngest grandson came running up to me for a hug. And I had to hold him mid-flight with the words, "Stop. No, sweetie, we can't do that now." That's hard for me to read. This story was submitted by Cindy McComb. What did I do during the COVID pandemic? March 2020. The library in Quaker Street where I worked closed to the public along with all the other Schenectady County public libraries. On Easter Day, I found myself at the Public Health Building on Knott Terrace in Schenectady, along with Karen Bradley, the director of the Schenectady County Libraries. We were there to volunteer. We received instructions and a list of local folks who had tested positive for COVID and were quarantined. Our job was to drive to their house, drop off any supplies they had requested, then to call on the phone alerting them that the supplies had been placed outside their door, reminding them of the importance to the community of their observance of the quarantine, and recording the symptoms they were experiencing. It soon became apparent that this format was inadequate as many more people became infected. The following week, the county manager, Rory Fluman, had swung into action. Schenectady Public Health was called in to handle this catastrophe. A command center was made ready, office space speedily arranged, phone lines installed, and protocol established. What we were experiencing was unprecedented. Disruption was everywhere, and we were figuring things out as we went along. County office buildings were closed, schools were reinventing themselves, and businesses were trying to imagine ways to safely adjust without total loss. Watching how our county leaders handle this event made me proud to be a county employee. Karen Bradley, the library director, was captain of our workforce, steering our small ship of employee volunteers to where they could help the most. Other county agencies did this as well, but the staff of the Department of Public Health really switched it up to high gear to handle the crisis. With libraries closed, I, along with other library staff, began volunteering at a local food pantry created to help quarantined families to get essentials. Schenectady County stepped up in a big way to make food and such things as diapers and baby formula available. We were set up at the Boys and Girls Club by the Mount Pleasant Middle School. There was a call line for anyone in the community to use. Most of the library staff worked here at the food pantry. We answered the phones and wrote down lists with names and addresses to pass to the delivery area, where information was organized, boxes packed, and truckloads delivered to proper destinations. County employees from many departments, including the highway department and motor vehicle, were involved, driving, setting up phone lines, moving furniture. It didn't matter what job you used to do, for the moment, this was the job that needed doing. Masks had become essential protection, but as yet there were none commercially available, so anyone with a sewing machine and a little experience set about creating a supply. Others donated much-needed fabric. Medical offices, nursing homes, nurses everywhere needed to have protection. In a great hurry, I made 450 masks, the wash and reuse type, for neighbors, co-workers, and institutions in the area. I even mailed masks and patterns and fabric to places I knew of in North Carolina, Florida, and Ohio. Child-sized masks were needed as well. Anyone who asked for a mask, I made them a mask, all sizes, shapes, and colors. It felt good to be using my sewing machine, my superpower, in my grandson's words, for a good cause. Throughout the crisis, I have been involved in contact tracing. At first, it was done on paper, lists of names and symptoms. Then we worked on laptops, and it was forms online where the information was stored in orderly fashion. All information shared was confidential. We respected the privacy of anyone who called. After a while, and now it was winter again, we were allowed to work from home. I set up a little office space for myself and signed in each morning from there with my laptop. I know as I write this, 5 years later, I've probably forgotten much detail, but these are the memories that are most important to me. It was a memorable time, seeing how beautifully our community came together to support one another. It was also a time I hope never to see again.
Bart, before you start, would you just tell everybody this is the last story?
This is the last story. Is that okay? All right. This story was submitted by Wayne Blessing. We started to hear about the coronavirus in late January 2020. I had a doctor's appointment at that time. I asked my doctor what he thought about it, and his comment was that it would quickly pass like any other type of flu. I never went back to see that dentist again. In early February, I visited my son's family in Florida for a month and had a great time. We had no health concerns. Back home, I attended a birthday party in the first week of March, and no problem there either. The next week, the state was shut down. Church services and community events were not being held in person. I stopped going out, and my son started getting groceries for me. When he dropped off the groceries on my porch, I would spray them with Lysol. I also sprayed my mail. We all started wearing masks. First they were made of cloth, often homemade, but in time became more medically specific. Wearing a mask was not my cup of tea. I could not get used to how it hampered my breathing. In the spring of 21, they came out with a vaccine, and what a time we all had trying to set up appointments to get the shots, which were not simply given in the doctor's office. You had to use the internet to register, to get specific places where they were being given out. People were traveling to locations all over the state. I could not set up an appointment for myself, but my son was able to do it for me. This was at a huge tent complex on the campus of the State University in Albany. The National Guard was in charge, and the whole thing ran like a fine-tuned watch. I got both shots spaced about 3 weeks apart. This was in March. I was staying at home and keeping in touch with folks either by phone or Facebook. Without a mask, I still took daily walks as weather permitted along my country roads. But interestingly, I would sometimes see a person driving alone in a car wearing a mask. We no longer kept scheduled appointments with our dentists or doctors or even our barbers. Our hair grew as it would, and we chopped at it ourselves with a mirror and scissors. No one ever quite knew what was best to do about anything, and disagreements broke out. I had not gone to Florida at all in the winter of 21, but by summer things seemed to be turning around. So I decided I'd fly to Florida, visit with my son's family near Fort Myers. As a special outing, we went to see the Marlins play the Red Sox. There were 20,000 fans in the stadium that day and not a mask in sight. That was late in June. And for the records, Marlins won 1-0. On the eve of my departure for home on the 4th of July, I was not feeling well. And while in the bathroom of my son's house getting ready for bed, I fainted, fell, and broke my left hip. A local ambulance came, took me to the hospital. The first thing they did was to test for the coronavirus, and sure enough, I tested positive, which was messing with my heart and my oxygen intake. I was placed in a very small room. I could have no visitors. Attending nurses wore masks and protective gear when they came into the room and threw them away when they left the room. It was 3 days before a doctor could repair the broken hip bone. As soon as possible, I was shipped out of the hospital and returned to my son's house, but within 2 days, a visiting nurse detected an infection in a bed sore that had developed, and I was sent back to the hospital to deal with that, underlined, and, all caps, with pneumonia, which I was now battling. No visitors again. And of course, there were the expected skirmishes with the insurance company. But after a week or so, I was told I was ready for rehab. It was now August. The rehab experience was terrible. There was not enough help. The food was awful. And my kids couldn't bring me anything because still no visitors. I lost 25 pounds. Think about that. Rehab exercises had to be conducted in my small room, as I was not allowed to walk in the halls because of state regulations about COVID. I have never been in jail, but I think that experience was pretty close to it. Around the 1st of September, I was allowed to return to my son's house. At my request, they brought me, the released prisoner, a huge bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with a super side of fries. No meal, either before or since, has tasted as good as that one did. Finally, I had the freedom to move about, practice the recommended exercises, and enjoy being home with family again. Near the end of September, the bone doctor said I was ready to fly home. The originally planned 10-day trip had turned into 3 months, 2 of which were a painful ordeal. Now, 5 years have gone by as I write this memoir. I go each year to get my COVID prevention shot, 8 so far. They're now regularly available at a pharmacy at no charge. And now one final story. I'm a member of the Princetown Senior Citizens, and this past summer we had a picnic. On the day we had it, the humidity was so high that we all moved inside to eat. There were more than 30 of us, and in the days following, 15 came down with COVID. Thankfully, this time, I was not one of them. Wayne bless you.
That concludes the